Hello everybody, welcome again to another video in my photographic series, vintage film photography series. I want to talk to you about 35mm film today. I've been concentrating up until now on medium format film, but a few people are asking me, because 35mm was a format that they were more familiar with, how best to start shooting with that again, or for the first time, before you've actually decided whether it's a hobby you want to pursue. Now obviously you can spend an awful lot of money on vintage cameras. If you know what you're looking for and you're looking for a particular make such as a Leica or whatever, you're going to pay a fair amount. At the other end of the scale, there's quite a choice though of really quite cheap cameras. I've got a couple of examples here. I would stress that there are many more, so please have a look around. But these two cameras are first of all very cheap to buy. They, for me, were about £7 each, which is about what, $9, something like that. So not an awful outlay, and also they're very simple to operate. They're essentially point and click, but there are a few adjustments that can be made, and so really an ideal start. Now I would say, because they're very cheap, they're not always very good quality and you may have issues with them, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect. So I'll come on to those in a minute. For those of you who are not familiar, this is 35mm film, and people of a certain age like myself will be more than familiar with it, because before digital came along, this really was one of the most popular formats. And so the film is still available today very readily, and it is quite cheap to buy. I mean, black and white is a little bit more expensive. Colour film, you're only talking a few pounds. And the processing of it, printing aside, just to develop the negatives, I think this is costing me about £3. So it's not a huge outlay for you. For £20–30 or whatever, you can give yourself a good chance to see whether or not film photography is for you, and you can obviously then look at perhaps more of an investment. There are more recent cameras. If you're not interested in the vintage side of things, there are more recent cameras out there, Minolta and brands like that, that are still again quite cheap, and I'll look at perhaps a couple of those on a future video. But for now, we're looking at two cameras. So if I start with this, let's get that one out of the way for a moment. So this is known as the Regulette, made by a German manufacturer called King. I've actually got film in this one at the moment. There's a few shots left to go, so I don't want to sort of waste any as such, and it means I can't open it up, but we can talk about that more in a moment. This particular model is from 1960. I think they were made for about 6 or 7 years, but this was one of the first ones. And like I said to you, it's really straightforward. You can't really go wrong. There are some adjustments you can make. We have a focusing ring here on the front. We have another ring that will set our shutter speed. Shutter speed ranges from, let me see, there's a bulb setting, which is basically open and whilst you're pressing the shutter bulb, and then it goes from 30th of a second up to 250th of a second. So yeah, pretty sort of straightforward, but it's quite flexible as well. There's also a setting for our aperture. The lens on this, if I remember correctly, is 45mm and it's an f2.8, goes up to f16. So if these are terms that are familiar with you, it's quite a flexible camera. It does have an option for a remote shutter release as well, but essentially it's a wind on the back. I guess obviously it's waiting to take a shot, so it won't wind at the moment, but once the shutter is pressed, I can wind that on. The shutter, once it's pressed, then will allow it to be wound on again, so you can't double exposure. It prevents you from doing that. Once you're used up all the film, once your exposures have been used, there's a release button here which you press, and then it can be wound back onto the reel using this winder here. Very straightforward, and like I say, not the greatest of quality, but that does make it quite cheap to buy. I think the most expensive I've seen these for is about £20, but there are a few different models as well, some with some extra features, so it could be worth looking at as an option for you. So that's the Regulette by King. I've also then got, this is a camera known as the Halina 35X. Now this was actually based on another camera, so it's Chinese made, Hong Kong it was made in, although I understand the manufacturer at the bottom here is actually Empire made, which is obviously harking back to the days when Hong Kong was under British control. But basically, Chinese made copy of Ranger 35, I think it was. Quite a well-made camera in some respects because it's quite solid. It's actually really heavy, but in other respects, unfortunately, it's not the greatest of quality, but it's certainly okay. This one doesn't have a film in, so I can actually demonstrate how it works. But again, we've got a focusing ring, we've got a selection of speeds. So again, there's a bulb setting, and it goes then from 25th of a second up to 200th of a second. So again, quite a bit of flexibility there. And also obviously we've got the aperture. So this is a 35mm lens, f3.5, and it goes up to, if I can just see on my very poor eyesight here, it goes up to f16. Okay, this one was made in 1959, so quite an early model, but again they were made for 5 or 6 years. There's a few options out there. Mine isn't the greatest condition. There's a bit missing here. The badge and the leatherette, I suppose you want to call it, effect was coming off, which I've glued back. But yeah, shop around, have a look. Some people have reported that the film jams when you try and rewind it back after finishing the number of shots. I haven't had that issue, but it's something to be wary of. But like I say, it cost me £7. It wasn't a massive outlay. So this particular one, we can load a film by just undoing this, and then the whole back and bottom comes away, as you can see there. Okay, so our film would be loaded here, and obviously we'd pull it across. There's a take-up spool here, which we then wind on. Okay, before we can press the shutter, we do actually have to cock it with this camera. Some of the later ones, this option had gone and you didn't need to cock it, but just be aware of that. So you wind it on, we've got the shot in place, we would then take the shot, okay, and then obviously then it can wind on again. Pretty straightforward stuff. So quite simple, straightforward operation, but like I say, be wary that some of them unfortunately don't operate fully. It's worth shopping around. For me, it wasn't an issue if it didn't. I have used this one and it works fine. However, a number of people had a problem, but I wanted it for display purposes anyway once I tested it once. So the Halina 35 looks a little bit like a Leica in certain styling, but that's where the similarity ends. Leica is obviously the M6 particularly is pretty much the top of the range vintage camera you can buy these days, and the price will reflect that. There was a lovely quote I read about this. The nice thing about the Halina 35X is you're not likely to get mugged for it, but if you do, you can use it as a deadly weapon. It's very heavy for a camera of its size. Quite often known as the larder of the camera world, which is a bit unfair, I think, because I say for the price, you know, you're not going to expect, or you shouldn't expect too much. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, I'd be so grateful if you could like this video, subscribe to the channel, share the video. These are all things, comment, these are all things that really help a small channel out like me, and I would be most grateful. Other than that, we'll see you next time. Thank you.